When you both stop contacting each other, most people think the story has ended. They believe silence means indifference, that distance means detachment, that whoever walked away first has already moved on. But that belief is shallow because in reality, this is not the end of the story. This is where the real game begins. Silence is not empty. Silence is loud. Silence is a psychological battlefield where emotions don't die, they multiply. And in female psychology, especially, silence does something powerful, something most people never see coming. At first, the silence feels like relief. No messages to respond to, no explanations to give, no emotional labor to perform. There's a calmness that feels like freedom. She tells herself she's finally choosing peace. But underneath that calm surface, her mind starts replaying moments she thought she had already buried. Conversations, arguments, laughs, unfinished sentences. Silence removes. Distractions. And when distractions disappear, emotions get space to breathe. That's when the real processing begins. Women don't detach the moment contact stops. They process, they analyze, they revisit. She starts asking herself questions she avoided when communication was constant. Did I ask for too much? Did I ignore the signs? Why did it have to end like this? And the emotional panic most people fail to control, the most dangerous question of all, what if I handled it differently? Silence turns memory into a loop. And every loop strengthens emotional attachment, not weakens it. When you're gone and no longer available, you're no longer predictable. And unpredictability creates curiosity. Curiosity creates emotional tension. Emotional tension creates attachment. This is why silence is not passive, it's active. It forces her to fill in the gaps with her own imagination. And the mind is far more powerful than any message you could ever send. At the same time, there's pride involved. She won't reach out easily, not because she doesn't care, but because caring too much feels like losing. Female psychology is deeply connected to self-respect. Reaching out after silence can feel like admitting weakness, like surrendering control. So instead, she waits. And waiting doesn't mean forgetting. Waiting means watching your social media, watching your absence, watching how life feels without you in it. This is where the emotional tug of war begins. One part of her wants closure, the other part wants validation. Closure means accepting it's over. Validation means proving it mattered. And silence keeps both doors open. As long as neither of you speaks, the story isn't officially finished, it's suspended, and suspended stories are the hardest to let go of. She starts comparing how she felt with you to how she feels now. Even if the relationship had flaws, familiarity has power. The what she starts thinking. When you disappear, human brain is wired to crave what's known, even when what's known wasn't perfect. So, your absence becomes noticeable in the smallest things. A joke she would have shared with you, a moment she would have texted you about without thinking. Silence turns you into a missing piece, not a forgotten one. And here's what most people don't understand. When communication stops completely, emotions don't fade evenly on both sides. The one who was emotionally invested processes slower, deeper, and more intensely. If she loved deeply, silence doesn't erase that love, it forces it inward. Outward expression stops, but inner attachment often grows stronger before it ever weakens. This is also when idealization starts. The mind begins filtering memories, replaying the good moments louder than the bad ones. The arguments lose their sharpness. The affection becomes brighter. Silence removes conflict. And without conflict, the emotional highlights take center stage. Suddenly, you're not the person who disappointed her. You're the person who made her feel seen, wanted, understood at least once. But don't confuse this with desperation. Female psychology doesn't collapse into neediness. Instead, it becomes quiet intensity. She may appear fine, she may even look happier, but emotional processing doesn't need an audience. Just because she's not reaching out doesn't mean she's not feeling. Often it means she's feeling too much. Meanwhile, something else is happening. Why mutual silence is more powerful than chasing beneath the surface. Silence forces self reflection. She starts looking at her own role, her own boundaries, her own patterns. And this is where the power dynamic shifts. If she realizes she gave more than she received, the silence strengthens her resolve. If she realizes she held back too much, the silence fills her with regret. Either way, you occupy mental space, and mental space is more valuable than attention. When both of you stop contacting each other, the ego steps in. Who will break first becomes an unspoken question, but for her, it's rarely about winning, it's about meaning. If she reaches out and gets nothing, it confirms her deepest fear that she cared more. So she protects herself by staying silent, even if that silence hurts. And here's the paradox. The longer the silence lasts, the heavier it becomes. What started as a pause becomes a statement. Every day without contact adds weight to the connection that once existed. Silence becomes symbolic. It represents pride, fear, longing, and unresolved emotion all at once. This is why breaking silence is so powerful and so risky. A single message can collapse weeks of emotional tension. It can bring relief or it can bring pain. That's why she hesitates. Because once contact resumes, the fantasy ends, reality returns, and reality may not live up to what silence allowed her to imagine. But understand this clearly, silence does not mean you're erased. In female psychology, silence often means you're being evaluated in absence. Your value is being measured not by what you say, but by how you're missed. And missing someone is one of the strongest indicators of emotional attachment. Over time, one of two things happens. Either the silence transforms into acceptance, female psychology, curiosity, ego, and absence, or it transforms into realization. Acceptance looks like emotional distance, clarity, and moving forward without resentment. Realization looks like longing, regret, and a desire to reconnect, but only if it feels safe, mutual, and meaningful. And this is where the real game truly reveals itself. The game is not about manipulation. It's not about who texts first. It's about who grows during the silence. Because growth changes everything. If she grows and realizes she deserves more, silence becomes permanent. If she grows and realizes the connection was rare, silence becomes unbearable. Most people break silence too soon before emotions have settled, before clarity has formed. They speak from loneliness instead of understanding. But silence, when allowed to do its work, exposes truth. It shows whether the bond was real or just convenient, whether the connection was deep or just familiar. So, when you both stop contacting each other, don't assume nothing is happening. Assume everything is happening internally, thoughts are colliding, feelings are reshaping, identity is being questioned, and the outcome depends not on who breaks silence first, but on who becomes stronger within it. Because in the end, silence doesn't punish the person who is missed. It reveals the person who mattered. And if one day the silence breaks, it won't be because of boredom or weakness. It will be because the emotional weight became impossible to ignore. And if it never breaks, that silence will still have done its job, transforming attachment into wisdom, longing into clarity, and absence into self-respect. So remember this, when you both stop contacting each other, it's the internal conflict silence creates in her mind, not the end of the story. It's the moment where truth begins to surface, emotions show their real strength, and the connection faces its final test. And the question isn't who will text first, but who will come out of the silence changed forever. And as the silence stretches on, something even deeper begins to happen. Time no longer works the way people expect it to. Days don't necessarily make feelings weaker, they make them clearer. With every passing day of no contact, emotions either dissolve or crystallize. There is no middle ground. And in female psychology, crystallized emotions are dangerous because they come with certainty. Once a woman becomes certain about what she feels, she stops being confused. And confusion is often what keeps connections alive. During this phase, she starts noticing patterns, not just about you, but about herself. She realizes how often she adjusted, how much she tolerated, how deeply she invested. Silence removes the emotional noise and exposes emotional truth. And truth doesn't always bring comfort. Sometimes it brings grief. Sometimes it brings empowerment. Sometimes it brings both at the same time. She may tell herself she's fine, and in many ways she is. Life continues, responsibilities remain, smiles still happen, but emotional detachment doesn't arrive suddenly. It arrives quietly, almost invisibly. One day she notices she didn't think about you in the morning. Why restraint builds emotional pressure. Another day, she realizes your absence didn't ruin her mood. These moments don't feel dramatic, but they are milestones. They mark emotional independence forming beneath the arbgitei surface. Yet paradoxically, just when detachment seems close, memory can strike unexpectedly. A song, a place, a scent, a random moment of stillness. And suddenly, emotions resurface with intensity. This doesn't mean she's regressing, it means the bond was real. Real connections leave echoes. Silence doesn't erase echoes, it amplifies them before they fade. This is where many misunderstand female psychology. Emotional depth doesn't mean emotional weakness. Feeling deeply doesn't mean losing control. In fact, women often gain control by feeling fully first. Silence gives her that space. No external influence, no mixed signals, just her thoughts and her truth. And once she reaches that truth, her decisions become final. She also begins to imagine scenarios, not fantasies, but possibilities. What if you never come back? What if someone else enters her life? What if this silence is permanent? These thoughts are not signs of desperation, and they are signs of adaptation. The mind prepares for survival long before the heart lets go. And preparation is power. If you do reappear after a long silence, you won't meet the same version of her. That's the risk most people don't calculate. Silence changes people. The woman who waited is not the woman who answers. She may still care, but caring no longer guarantees access. Emotional availability becomes selective. Trust becomes conditional. Interest must now be earned, not assumed. And if you don't reappear, the silence still shapes her future. It teaches her boundaries. The shift, when power quietly changes hands, sharpens her intuition. It rewires her attachment style. She becomes more aware of red flags, more protective of her energy, less willing to chase clarity from someone who chose absence. Silence in this way becomes a teacher. There's also a quiet pride that develops. Not the loud, ego driven kind, but the grounded kind. The pride of knowing she survived not being chosen, not being prioritized, not being contacted. That pride becomes self respect. And self respect is the strongest emotional armor a woman can wear. At this stage, reaching out feels unnecessary. Not because she doesn't remember you, but because she remembers herself. She remembers how it felt to wait, how it felt to wonder, how it felt to hope. And she promises herself not to return to that place again. This is why silence is irreversible once it completes its work. You can't undo growth. You can't rewind clarity. You can't make someone unsee what they finally understood in your absence. Silence either rebuilds the connection on stronger terms or closes the door forever. And both outcomes are decided long before a message is ever sent. People often assume that the one who stays silent is suffering more. That's not always true. Sometimes the one who breaks silence does so because they couldn't handle the emotional weight of being forgotten. Silence is only painful when it's empty. When silence is full of self-discovery, it becomes peaceful. And here's the hardest truth of all. The longer the silence lasts, the less it becomes about the other person. Eventually, it becomes about identity, about who she is without you, about what she tolerates, about the biggest mistake men make during no contact, what she wants next. And once that shift happens, the emotional attachment loosens its grip, not because love disappeared, but because self-worth took its place. So when you both stop contacting each other, understand that the real game is not manipulation, strategy, or timing. The real game is internal transformation. Whoever uses the silence to grow wins, not the other person, but themselves. Because in the end, silence doesn't ask who will text first. Silence asks a far more powerful question: who will no longer need to? And once that question is answered, everything changes, which makes you wonder if silence can transform people this deeply. What happens the moment one message finally breaks it? As the silence deepens even further, it begins to lose its sharp edges. What once felt heavy now feels familiar. The heart adapts before the mind realizes it has. This is the quiet phase where emotions stop screaming and start whispering, and whispers are dangerous because they feel calm, but they carry truth. In this phase, she is no longer fighting the silence or resisting it. She's living inside it. And that changes everything. She no longer checks her phone with the same urgency. The expectation fades. Hope no longer spikes with every notification. That doesn't mean you no longer matter. It means the attachment has stopped controlling her behavior. Emotional freedom begins the moment expectation dies, and expectation almost always dies in silence. At this point, memories become neutral. They no longer hurt, but they no longer pull either. She can think of you without feeling when silence makes you unforgettable rush of emotion. That emotional neutrality is the final stage of detachment. It's not anger, it's not sadness, it's peace. And peace is rarely loud. It's subtle, almost unnoticeable until you realize it's permanent. She starts redirecting her energy not as a distraction, but as a decision. New goals, new routines, new standards. The silence didn't empty her, it made room. And what she allows to fill that space now defines her future. This is why late returns often fail. You're no longer competing with another person, you're competing with her peace. If you were to reach out now, the dynamic would be unfamiliar. The power balance has shifted. She listens more than she speaks. She observes more than she reacts. Silence taught her restraint. It taught her that not everything deserves an emotional response. That alone makes her stronger than before. And here's the part few people accept. When silence lasts long enough, love doesn't always disappear. It transforms. It becomes appreciation without attachment, gratitude without longing, care without need. And that version of love doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't wait. It simply exists, detached from outcome. This is why silence is such a powerful filter. It removes illusions, it reveals intentions, it shows who stays emotionally present without access, and final truth. Detachment is the real win who only cared when attention was available. Silence exposes emotional dependency in a way no argument ever could. Eventually, she stops asking why it ended and starts asking what she learned. That question marks emotional maturity. She understands that not every connection is meant to last forever, but every connection is meant to teach something. And once the lesson is learned, the attachment loosens naturally. There's no dramatic closure moment, no final message, no perfect goodbye. Closure arrives internally. It shows up as acceptance, as gratitude, as a quiet understanding that the chapter served its purpose. And when closure comes from within, external validation is no longer needed. This is why breaking silence after a long time often feels anticlimactic. The emotions you expect aren't there anymore. The intensity has already been processed alone. What remains is clarity, and clarity doesn't beg for reunions. It decides whether they're even necessary. So when you both stop contacting each other, don't mistake silence for stagnation. It's movement without noise, growth without witnesses, transformation without announcement. The real game was never about who held out longer. It was about who evolved deeper. And when all is said and done, silence leaves you with one undeniable truth. If someone can lose access to you and you still become stronger, wiser, and more complete, then the silence didn't break you, it revealed you. And the final question isn't whether silence will end, but whether, once it does, you'll even recognize the version of each other it left behind.